So, to introduce Dr. Lieberman.
Jacob.
He began his career as an optometrist, but his interest quickly evolved to a more holistic exploration of light, not just as key component of vision, but as a healing energy. And over the last half century, he's written books, won awards, and inspired audiences all around the world. And his presentation style is one of not preparing a speech, but letting the thoughts of the moment interact with all of you. And so with that, I introduce Dr. Jacob Lieberman. Thank you.
I'm delighted to be here with the love of my life, my wife, Deborah. We traveled from Maui, Hawaii, where we live, which is our little piece of heaven, just like Vail is your little piece of heaven. You know that we recently were affected and impacted by some horrific fires, which allow us to realize how delicate life is and how at any instant something can shift in a direction that you would never, ever think. You would never, ever think. So all of us have the pleasure of living in a beautiful place. And what makes it beautiful are the people. Environmentally, it's beautiful, but the people that are drawn to it are real. They really care. They don't see each other as different. And so we're very blessed. But as you know, each day you look at CNN or you listen to the news or you look at the newspaper and you see, gee, it's not so rosy out there. People seem to be fighting about everything. There's no shared reality. When I was a kid, we'd get our news from Walter Cronkite. Most people today wouldn't even know who that is. But that was the trusted voice. Trust is hardwired in our genetics. And yet, we don't see it hardly anywhere except for those little pockets like Vail or Aspen or Maui, Hawaii. We see horrific things going on and more divisiveness than I have ever experienced in my life. They say, united we stand, divided we fall. What has created this bifurcation? What has brought us to this place? There was a time when none of us had any thoughts, any worries, no concerns. The moment we emerged from our mother's womb, something instantaneously started breathing us. We don't breathe on our own. Something started breathing us. Something started pumping our hearts, regulating our blood pressure, causing all the glandular changes and hormonal changes in the body, letting us know when it was time to consume food or when it was time to drink or anything else. Do you realize even without an alarm clock, you get up in the morning without doing a damn thing? Something takes you to your bed at night when the body's ready to lay down. It walks you to the kitchen when you're hungry. And None of this requires a single thought. It occurs for you. Trained in the medical field, I can tell you that there is nothing physiologically in the body that is designed to initiate action. Let me put that in more lay terminology. Nothing within us is designed to do. Everything is responding to something. What is it responding to? An animating force. The force has no name, but we call it all kinds of things. But it's an animating force. Whether you look at it as a scientist or a religious person or a spirit, it doesn't make any difference. Something is moving the planets around the sun. Something is regulating the tides and the seasons. And the same something that's doing that is regulating everything within us without having to do anything. That's a fact of science. That's not just some new agey idea. And that occurs in Mother Nature all day long. You live on heaven on earth. Deborah and I live in one of those places. Taking into account what I've just shared with you, how did we get to this place that we are right now? How is it that 2.5 weeks ago, all of a sudden, Maui got impacted by something that Hawaii has never experienced, just came out of nowhere? Tomorrow we're flying to Florida. They're getting hit by a hurricane right now. 2 days after that, we're flying to Athens. They're dealing with fires. So we know all about the environmental changes that are going on. But those changes are going on everywhere. Everything is heating up. Whether it's the political world, whether it's the number of people getting sick. Every day I find some new pharmaceutical agent being marketed on television for a disease I've never heard of. Young kids are getting disorders that young kids never suffered from. 25% of all the medications that are prescribed are psychotherapeutic drugs. We're not at rest. We're in a constant state of stress. And stress is now responsible for 90% of disease, which begins as dis-ease. How did we get there? We came out of our mothers, and whoever delivered us immediately was looking to see if the body was doing this. And if it has that movement, they know that life is happening. And then they immediately look down toward the genitals and they say, it's a boy or it's a girl. Now we know in life things are not black and white. They're shades of gray. Immediately you're assigned a boy or a girl, and then you have a name associated with that. And then the name comes with certain clothing. When an infant enters this life, it has no preferences. It lives in oceanic bliss. It's hardwired for oneness. Not good or bad, right or wrong. It's hardwired for being at peace with all that is. It's unconditionally accepting. It has no sense of preferences. It has no sense of gender. It has no sense of skin coloration. It has no sense of religiosity. It has no sense that it is separate from its mother and father. For several months, it's just in a bubble of oneness. But each time we assign something to it, it's male or female, it's this, or it's this, or it's this, or it's this, the child is conditioned. We condition the child with all these things. Now, part of that comes through energetically, because from one generation to the next, we've been doing this for millions of years. The problem is that conditioning, which is no different than what happened to Pavlov's dogs, who salivated when he rang a bell even though there was no food. We are a bundle of conditioned reflexes. And we think we are the persona created by the conditioning. You know, in the olden days of theater, before they had elaborate costumes, they would have these masks with a little stick, and you'd hold the stick, and the mask was the persona of who you were representing. Persona is the word personality comes from. Oh, they have a lovely personality. Persona comes from the Latin personare, which means to peer through. The essence of one's humanity is not the persona, it's that which is peering through. But because of the conditioning, we go through life thinking, oh, I'm an optometrist, or I'm a dentist, or I'm a plumber, or I'm a man, or I'm a woman, or whatever it is. And if you happen not to fit in the societal rules, life can be very, very difficult, very, very painful, very, very disruptive to your essence. Take a simple example. If infants were not trained in any way, they would all naturally toilet train by themselves, just modeling what they see. But we have some idea that says at a certain age, they got to be toilet trained. So the moment the infant starts to make little sounds or you hear gurgling, you pick it up, you run over to the, you put them on the little porta potty, and you say, now you can make. And essentially, what naturally would occur from them, they have to hold it until they get there. And then I remember as a kid growing up, when my parents wanted to go out on Sunday, go to the bathroom, because once your father starts driving, we can't stop. So one end of it is make something happen that isn't ready to happen. And the other end of it is stop something from happening that is ready to happen. Now, if you look at our lives, that's just one simple example of what happens in our life all day long. We're either trying to make something happen or trying to stop something from happening. And that creates an incredible amount of stress. So let me share with you some of the ways that these awarenesses came to me. You know, I was trained in the vision care field. I wore glasses for nine and a half years. I couldn't see without them. I couldn't drive without them. Took my glasses off. I could see the big E. And in 1976, I had this profound experience while I was meditating. I won't go through all the details of it. But while my eyes were closed, I was aware of myself sitting in the room that I was sitting in. And I was aware of the room itself. And even though my eyes were closed, everything was as clear as I had ever experienced it. It wasn't just optically clear. When I say it was clear, I mean everything was known. There were no questions or concerns about anything. Now, I don't know how to explain that to you, but I hope you can hear what I can't say. And when I opened up my eyes, my eyesight was clear, which at first was incredibly exciting and then scared the daylights out of me, because this is not supposed to happen. Certainly, they never tell you about that in your medical training because it's not supposed to happen. So, must be impossible. So I drove myself to my office on a Sunday. My glasses were on the seat next to me because my license said I had to wear glasses to drive. I sat in my examination chair, something I never did. I started projecting up all kinds of eye charts that I had never seen before. And I could read 300% better. One line better than 20/20. I couldn't understand it because I wasn't straining or squinting or anything. So I said, well, if this has happened, maybe my prescription has disappeared, even though I have no idea how the hell that could have happened. So I put myself behind that instrument and asked myself those same confusing questions most of you have heard. Which is better, number one or number two? Show me again. I went through that process, and when I finished and came out from behind the instrument, it's called a phoropter, I thought the instrument would show plano, zero, nothing. But what was in the instrument was almost the exact prescription that was in my glasses. In other words, some mechanism within me could see 300% better, but the optical measurements of my eyes didn't change at all. Now, I was stunned because I was trained to believe you see with your eyes, with your brain. If the lenses, the windows of the soul are distorted, that's the way you're going to see. Well, what I've come to realize is that the seeing mechanism is not just the eye, it's not just the brain, it's not just the mind, it's something beyond all of that. Now, that experience in 1976 has now remained for 46 years. It wasn't, as they say in baseball, a flash in the pan. Just happened and it was gone. And you know how much effort it took? 0. I didn't do anything. I don't know how it even occurred. Other than I had a moment of clarity. A moment of clarity. I'm going to jump to something else for a moment. Many years ago, I was doing a keynote address at a national psychology conference. I don't remember what I was speaking about, but there was a woman in the audience who stood up and introduced herself. Her name was Candace Pert. Candace Pert has passed away, and we became very dear friends. Candace was a renowned neuroscientist who did some of the foundational work in the field of mind-body medicine, or what we call psychoneuroimmunoendocrinology. And Candace got up because she had never heard some of the work that I was sharing about light, and she started sharing some of her discoveries. She wrote a book called Molecules of Emotion. And basically what she said is every belief that you identify with basically is mirrored in your biology. So the biology literally becomes a mirror of what's happening in the mind, the things you believe. That's why it's called psychoneuroimmunology. Starts with the mind and then goes into the body. And she says, so every state of mind has a state of body. And I was just floored by some of the things she was sharing. And then something comes out of me that I don't know where the hell it came from. And I said, well, what happens if you have no point of view? And she gets silent, and she says, geez, I've never considered that. I've never considered that. So one thought gets you this way, the other thought gets you this way, but what happens if the mind is empty? Well, I had many, many discussions with Candace. She even stayed in my home numerous times. And I spoke to her about the fact that my sense is that that state might be the catalyzing force that underlies spontaneous remission, where something instantaneously changes and you say, well, that's impossible. Change doesn't happen that way. But it does. It actually does. It can occur instantaneously. I was speaking about babies coming into this world. Do you know that the baby always lets you know when it's content? And it always lets you know when it's not. And you know that that happens without a thought. Without a single thought. There's a mechanism inside all living things. All living things have a fundamental mechanism that is for the purpose of survival. That mechanism is an internal GPS that knows when to open the door just a little bit, or when not to open the door. And it does it without a single thought. Just look at animals in nature. If you have distance from them, they might just be sleeping. The moment you get within a certain distance from them, an ear goes up, an eye opens up. If you continue coming, every living thing, including plants, have this mechanism. It is common to life. It's called common sense. That's what common sense is. We don't hear that term much anymore. Common sense means the same as genius. Genius isn't someone with a big brain. The original definition of genius is guiding spirit. That's the GPS. That is the aspect of humanity which is a holographic focal point of light. The same light that the Bible says God is light. Somewhere we went from common sense to nonsense. And we are seeing the result of that in every facet of life. Every facet of life. So how do we discern truth from belief? Belief is a very common word these days. Oh, I believe this, I believe this. You need to change your beliefs. Do you realize that the word belief means the opposite of the word truth? What if all of our beliefs are not the truth? When I say the truth, I'm not talking about what you think the truth is. I'm talking about the truth that they say will set you free. About 1,500 years ago, a great sage named Sengsten wrote a piece called the Sin Sin Ming. This is the first verse. The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. When love and hate are both absent, everything is clear and undisguised. Make the slightest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set infinitely apart. If you wish to see the truth, hold no opinions for or against anything. Jesus, in the Gospel of Thomas, said it a slightly different way. He's quoted as saying, when up is down and down is up, when the outside and the inside are the same, when you see a man as a woman and a woman as a man, then you shall enter the kingdom. What were these sages saying? What they were saying is that all the things that we do with the mind, that's what keeps us out of the kingdom. So let's talk about that. Do you realize the word or the expression, I think, means I don't know? Do you realize that most of the thoughts that occur, that you experience during the day, and there's about 70,000 per person, never, ever come true? That's why they say, you're always going to the worst case scenario. The mind, when I was a kid, the expression was the mind was a terrible thing to waste. The mind is incredibly inaccurate. We've all been conditioned to believe that that is what made us more evolved than all the other creatures. I could think. And of course, thinking is a very intellectual word. But you know it's not thinking. It's actually worrying. It's what goes on all the time when we get a little nervous and we want to tweak it to make sure it comes out our way. Notice I didn't prepare a PowerPoint or have notes. How could I possibly know what it is that needs to be shared tonight? I don't have that knowledge. How will I ever know what happens without any effort, which is really the miracle of life, if I'm well prepared for everything? If I've got it down. I've rehearsed it 1,000,000 times. It's like Memorex. Boom. Got it perfectly down. But creation is something emerging from nothing. It's the original, not the giclée. It's the original. You think you came here tonight to hear something that I might share with you. And what I'm trying to tell you is, I'm having the experience of a lifetime right now because I don't have any idea where any of this is coming from. You just heard how touching that is. That's real magic. It's not sleight of hand or trickery. And most of our interactions during the day are like this. But we think that if we're going to share with more than one person, we have to prepare. We've been trained to do that throughout our life. Oh, you got to try harder. You got to think ahead. Not only is that not accurate, nothing within us is designed for that. Why am I speaking about this? I have a sense that almost every problem on this earth is related to what we're talking about. What could happen if we had a glimpse of truth? What could happen if we, just like the infants we came from, without a thought, knew when we were comfortable and when we weren't? Didn't have to do anything about it. If we're in a situation and there's resonance, something goes, and it just brings you together. You don't have to do anything. And if there's dissonance, it naturally brings you apart without doing anything. Birds of a feather flock together because they share something. It's what we're sharing this evening. So let's just talk about light a second, because this is inseparable from light. Being trained in the vision care field, we are taught nothing about light. Light is just something that enters the eye, and they teach you something about the optics of the eyes. But they tell you nothing about light. Now, you know, light is a very interesting thing. Everyone thinks they know what light is. Oh, that's that stuff outside. But you can't see light. It is it defines invisibility. You cannot magnify it enough to see it. You perceptually experience brightness. You do not see light. So what is light? The Bible, if you look at it from a religious perspective, says that the creative force of this universe, that which is described as all-knowing, all-powerful, and everywhere at the same time, they say that's light. If you look at spiritual texts going back a long distance, consciousness, which very few people have any direct sense of, other than an intellectual understanding, consciousness is light, the light of consciousness. You speak to a physicist, what is the ground of reality? What is the energy from where life emerges? That energy is called light. David Bohm, the renowned theoretical quantum physicist, said, all matter is frozen light. Everything you perceive as solid is just alchemized energy, something that is formless that you experience as form. Light in solidified form is a plant that you consume. Light interacts with the eyes in a very unique way. We've been trained to believe that the eye is meant for looking. It's meant for noticing. What is it noticing? It's noticing what catches the eye. That expression, oh, it caught my eye. What's the it? The it is light. Now, if light, which is equated with consciousness, the ground of reality, or God, catches our eye, that's an important something catching our eye. Why is it doing that? Because the moment it catches the eye reflexively moves without a thought, without an action. It's a reflex, just like your knee getting hit. The eye moves toward that which has caught it, which has called it. The body then realigns itself. That moment, the connection where life is calling us, when that moment occurs, that's called presence. Presence is not someone being present. Presence occurs involuntarily. It's something moving us towards the light that is illuminating our journey, catches our eye. Why does it catch our eye? Because it's taking us to the next step of life that's our journey. It's literally guiding us. And it doesn't just do that in terms of vision. When light catches the eye and the two eyes immediately move toward the light, that movement of the eyes, which is called aiming or convergence, that sets the whole foundation for being present with something. It suppresses external noise so one can attend. Attend. And you don't have to pay for this attention. And you're not in tension. It's effortless. It's effortless. And the moment the eyes converge to that which is calling it, simultaneously everything becomes clear. Focusing. But it's not about focusing. It's about clarity. What is clarity? I see. That doesn't mean I can read the eye chart. It means I know. Everything becomes clear. Without thought, it becomes clear by itself. And as things move, the eyes are continually tracking everything that's going on. We're totally unaware of it. And we have two eyes that work together that give us what we call 3D. Binocularity, three-dimensional vision. What is it really doing? It allows us to look deeply into things. So that's just one piece of it. 25% of the light that enters the eye is for that. The other 75% go to the portions of the brain that control all your life-sustaining functions. They go to a site in the brain where the biological clock. Now, every cell in your body, and there might be as many as 90 or 100 trillion cells, each one of them has a little iPhone watch. And that watch is synchronized with things in nature. And continually those trillions of watches are sending their information to this grandfather clock within the hypothalamus, the brain's brain, the CEO of the system. And this grandfather clock then synchronizes, works with a little gland, an organ called the pineal. The pineal, which was termed the seat of the soul or the sphincter of thought, that basically takes this information from the body's biological clock, which is inseparable from Mother Nature, shares it with every cell in the body simultaneously, so that that cell can orchestrate its internal function and then synchronize itself with Mother Nature. In other words, the purpose of light traveling through the eyes is primarily to naturally bring us into harmony with life. You don't have to go to a workshop. We're designed for this. It happens free of charge. 98% of the light that impinges the body enters via the eyes, 2% via the skin. What does the portion that touches the skin do? When light interacts with the engine of each of our cells, the mitochondria, it jump-starts the mitochondria to create energy for cellular function, metabolism, cellular repair, all the things you need to function. Most diseases are due to mitochondrial deficiency. Why? Other than in Vail and Maui and Aspen and maybe a couple of other choice places in the world where people love to be outside walking their dogs or whatever, the rest of the world's living inside. We've become an indoor culture. We're suffering from malillumination, like malnutrition. The major diseases today, heart disease, cancer, obesity, diabetes, osteoporosis, and Alzheimer's, are all related to vitamin D deficiency. Why? We're not in the sunshine. Just common sense. So light is inseparable from life. But you know, we have a clock I mentioned, and you've heard the term circadian rhythms. It means that the body's clock is synchronized with Mother Nature. Now, why would it be that way? You've all traveled, you've experienced jet lag. You know what that feels like. You're traveling from Maui to Vail, and all of a sudden you notice that you're eating at times you normally would never eat. You're going to the bathroom at times you would never go. You feel out of sort. Now it takes days for the adjustment to occur. Most people are suffering from jet lag, but they've not gotten close to an airport because they're living life according to ideas. That's called normal. Totally unnatural. Totally unnatural. Now, let me share with you something really important about light. In the 1600s, a world-renowned mathematician named Pierre de Fermat saw something really interesting. He was noticing what happens when light is moving from one point to the other. And he noticed that light always takes the fastest route to get there. If it has to go here and it can go this way or this way, it always knows exactly what the fastest route is and gets there in the shortest period of time. What Fermat noticed, which is really incredible, is that human beings intuitively follow the same principle of shortest time. Let me repeat that again. We are hardwired. Something within us knows without a thought what the quickest way is to get somewhere. About 230 years after Fermat's discoveries, Guillermo Ferrero, an Italian philosopher, he came up with something called the principle of least effort. He noticed that animals, human beings, and well-designed machines all function under the principle of least effort. They naturally are designed to work as little as possible to get exactly what's needed. Now that's exactly the way the universe works, by the way. So everything within this universe is functioning exactly the same way the universe functions. Now these two last things I said should make an impact on you. Because we tell our kids to try harder, to move more, to do this, And what I'm sharing with you is scientifically validated. The body is naturally designed to know which way is quicker and how to get there with the least resistance. The principle of least effort is also called the path of least resistance. It's also called the law of parsimony, the least effort to get anything done. That law defines economy. Economy means I invest 0 and I get 100% return. That's the way this universe works. That's the way we're designed to work. Every time we think about something or try to figure it out, the breath of life, which we are not breathing, something is breathing us, something constricts within us, and all of a sudden we allow in very little air. We become what we call clavicular breathers, upper chest breathers. And when that oxygen doesn't get in, the field of vision immediately goes, and we no longer see life as a whole, we see life through a hole. This is what happens with most kids that have learning issues. Their field of vision is incredibly reduced. Why? Because they're trying so hard. Most of these kids are incredibly brilliant. In fact, the most successful people in the world are not the A students. They're usually the average students. They all seem to make it. I spent years working with thousands of children that were labeled, they have minimal brain dysfunction, they have dyslexia, learning disabilities. Be careful for labels. I discovered many years ago it's not the disease that kills it, it's the diagnosis. Medicine has to find a new way of sharing with patients what's going on in a way that they're not stuck with it for the rest of their lives. My mother, God bless her soul, had cancer 4 times. And the first one, she was only supposed to live a month. She lived another 51 years. Now, my mother had no cancer when she died. But the cancer was never extracted from the mind. Every time she didn't feel well, every time she had to go to the doctor, it was, the cancer is coming back. You've seen those scenes with, most people today wouldn't even know who Perry Mason was, but it was a television show about this incredible attorney. And you'd see scenes in the courtroom where one attorney makes this statement to the jury they know they shouldn't say, and the judge says, strike that from the record. You know you can never strike it from the record. Once it's in the mind, you're stuck with it. It doesn't go away. So we get rid of the cancer in the body, but we're dealing with the idea and the belief of cancer our entire lives. We all watch television at times. And I'm sure we get moved by what's going on the screen, but we don't go to bed thinking we're the television. We have an internal mechanism that we erroneously refer to as my mind. It is not your mind. It is an archive of the conditioning that has occurred not only in our lives, but with our ancestors, and all the compensations that we develop to deal with the conditioning. Are you aware when the mind is chattering? Yeah? How? If it's my mind, If I am the mind, if I can change my mind or say, oh, I don't mind it, what is it that's noticing when the mind is chattering? Could that be the eyes of God? That is the experience I had in 1976. There was just pure awareness. The mechanism, whatever that is aware of everything externally, every somatic sensation we have, and what's happening in this thing called mind, which I'm going to take a moment to explain to you what that is. That is pure awareness, what people call consciousness. Except they say, oh, you really need to develop your consciousness. Consciousness or awareness is not a personal item. It's not my consciousness and your consciousness. It's the ocean from where everything arises. It's shared. We share that same ocean. That pure awareness has no point of view. It's an infinite field of noticing. It doesn't want this and not want this. But next time that the mind is chattering, just stop for a second and notice that you've noticed. That you have noticed. Not the you thought was you. The actual you. The you that the Bible says God created humans in God's image. Now, we don't know what about that story is or isn't, but everything in life is an extension of that animating force. Now let's just take another minute just to discuss something about the mind, which is really important. We have two brain halves. One is very creative. It's just spontaneous. It's what's happening for me this evening. And then we have a left hemisphere. And that left hemisphere, what it does is it creates a narrative about things. There was a very famous neuroscientist named Michael Gazzaniga. And Michael did some groundbreaking research, what they called split brain experiments. He was interested in, is there something we can do that can help people with seizures have less seizures? And so they did experiments where they cut the connection between the two hemispheres. It's called the corpus callosum. It's a bridge back here that connects the two hemispheres. And they got a lot less seizures for these people. But he noticed something else that was fantastic. If he asked a question that was directed just to one hemisphere, disconnected from the other, the right hemisphere, if you said, stand up and walk, the person would stand up and just walk. A little while later, you ask the same person's left hemisphere, what did you do? I went to the store and got some milk. What they notice consistently is that the right hemisphere just responds to life directly, and the left hemisphere makes up a narrative, which most of the time is inaccurate. That narrative is probably the chatter that you hear, that you're aware of. That narrative is what we've been trained to believe is us. That's me. That's the pilot. That's the one driving the train, makes the decisions, and based on the decisions, I move this way. If you're an athlete, you know that if you try to make a choice in the midst of action, you're in trouble. It's all happening without you. It's all happening without you. So I want to leave you with something. Life is not what you think. Thank you so much. I'm available for questions.
Hi, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So if right hemisphere is analytical,
Say that again.
if right hemisphere is responsible for the analytical, and left hemisphere is responsible for the narrative, do you think it's possible to train yourself out of a little bit of the narrative with right hemisphere-based analytical activities, spreadsheets?
So the question had to do with, can you train yourself so some of these things with the brain are not happening in that way? You don't have to train anything. It's very simple, but it's not easy. Awareness is curative. What do I mean by that? When you see something in a way you've never seen it before, it literally begins to rewire your brain instantaneously. Instantaneously. It doesn't take time. It can occur instantaneously. So what's the shift I'm talking about? It's the discovery that I'm not who I thought I was. You see, we're all suffering from a case of mistaken identity. We've been led to believe that we're that chattering voice. That I'm the persona. It's not true. You are the indescribable essence that is aware of all that is. And that is what's noticing this activity that you mentioned has to do with the hemispheres. Rather than looking for a technique, because techniques don't work. Techniques are like diets. You do it and it works, and then 2 weeks later you find yourself eating the same way again. You know, you can become militant about it. You can do it. Unless it's natural for you, you don't naturally do it. You don't naturally do it. You know, we're led to believe that we can do anything and we're going to change and do all these things. I look at photographs of myself in first grade. I'm exactly the same person right now. I'm the same sensitive little guy. Yes, I have less hair, I have this, you know. These things occur on the outside. But the essential me has always been exactly the same. When I was 11 years old, I was selling papers in Miami, Florida. I used to go after school, home, get a snack, and then go to the corner where I used to sell papers and make a penny on a paper. Nobody would have such a job today, but I got there early one day because I didn't have time to go home, so I drove straight down, I rode my bicycle straight down to 27th Avenue and Carl Way in Miami. The papers hadn't arrived, but I was hungry. And what caught my eye was Saunders Hardware Store across the street. I walked into Saunders Hardware Store. I knew exactly where the Mars bars were. I grabbed a chocolate bar, I stuck it in my pocket, and I started walking out. And all of a sudden, I hear that familiar voice inside the head. Nobody saw you. And immediately, something stops me in my tracks, and there's a realization. There was no sound. There was a realization, I saw me. I saw me. So that narrative that said, you can get away with it, nobody saw you. And then there's this other thing that misses nothing. That is the essential you. That is not the aspect that we have been conditioned to become that says, I like this, but I don't like this. I'll put up with this, but I won't put up with this. I like red, but I hate blue. That's called duality. Duality. That's like driving on the sidewalk or driving in the middle of the road on the center line. Non-duality is what you have to do to survive at life. Not to become successful as a doctor or a businessman, but to become successful at living. Keep your car in the center of the lane. That's called non-duality. So truth is what is seen from that place, what is directly experienced. What is it? People say, well, what is someone to believe? You hear this, you hear this. The only thing you know for sure is what you have a direct experience of. When I went to school, they would say, she knows it by heart. What you know by heart, that's truth. What someone else shares with you, you can entertain all that. But most people, they take that, which is not their experience at all, and is probably not the experience of the person who shared it either, and then just keeps passing it on. And we have all kinds of theories we have going on these days. Keep in mind, a theory, even a scientific theory, is something that's continually evolving. It's just a different kind of idea. But the idea, don't bank your life on it. Don't bank your life on it. Trust that internal GPS. Anyone else? Yes.
Thanks. Can you tell us a little bit more about when you were meditating and the idea of having no thoughts?
Well, let's take the second part of it. The idea of having no thoughts. It's not an idea. The only reason thoughts are occurring is because we feed them, and we have been led to believe that that's us. Oh, that's you thinking. No. Sometimes we interact with those thoughts because we think it's us thinking. But all that narrative is coming up continually from the left hemisphere of the brain. We're not making that stuff up. It's just coming all the time. And you can't control it. Oh, yes, I can breathe and I can focus on a mantra. I can do all those things, and all of those things are wonderful things to do. Meditation, all these things are good. But the purpose of meditation is not to quiet the mind. The purpose of meditation is to notice that the noticer is not the thing that's chattering. And the real purpose of meditation is that eventually our life becomes the meditation. And then what does that look like? Just planting seeds of goodness wherever you go. It's simple. Awakening, you're not special. You just notice that everyone in this world is exactly the same height. Thank God that we're all in exactly the same boat. None of us leave this earth without feeling the loss of many people, or having our hearts broken, or losing our parents, or God forbid a child, or getting diagnosed with something you didn't expect. No one leaves this earth without that. We share that. We're all in the same boat. Thank God we're all in the same boat. We don't have to do this alone. So, as we begin to recognize that we are not the thinker of the thoughts, We are that which is noticing the process going on. And we got to stop calling it thinking. That's antics with semantics. That's like calling death insurance life insurance, or illness care health care. It's just trickery. Almost everything that goes on there, you see, what happens, and you've been seeing it for the last hour. I came here empty-handed. I met several of you at the door. Each of you shared something. You didn't know it and I didn't know it, but you were actually providing me the curriculum or whatever it was that needed to be shared tonight. One person was talking about playing golf and the boyfriend gave her advice, even though we know that we learn from going through the experience. And someone else was saying, well, how did you come to this awareness? And someone else was talking about efforting. And all of a sudden, the evening created itself. I don't know how the hell it happened. But you see, that's the magic. That's the magic. That's what causes the sparkle in an infant's eye. That's the magic of life, is not knowing. Not knowing is the magic. Just innocence, just pure innocence. So when we begin to recognize that this activity is just occurring, and we are just noticing it, it gradually subsides. You know, sometimes you're having dinner and your puppy comes by the table and starts making little sounds because it wants a piece of whatever you're eating. So you give it a little piece. You think that'll cause it to stop? No. Wants another piece and another piece. If you just acknowledge the dog and then acknowledge that you're having dinner, you've acknowledged both things. The dog will just get quiet and usually it'll just go away. If you say, no, Sparky, that means, oh, they want to play with me. Any interaction, regardless of what you call positive or negative, will have the same effect. It's the same thing with this mechanism we call mind. We begin to notice that we're interacting with it. Each time we interact, we sign another year's lease. When you notice that it's happening, no problem. Don't say, oh shit. No problem. Just notice it. Allow the noticing to bring you back to the noticer. Each time you notice it, something automatically brings you back. And after a while, this chatterbox that is, for many people, incredibly loud, they think they're going to go crazy. It's almost like you went to sleep one night and someone took those speakers and surround sound and moved them further away and lowered the volume. Most of the days, for me, there's silence going on. And I can't tell you, oh, do this technique or do this. I don't know exactly how it works. I'm just sharing with you something that has dramatically impacted me. We do not come up with good ideas. They are slipped into our awareness. It's called inspiration. That which is breathing us slips into our awareness all the things that became big Nobel Prize winning discoveries. Einstein was once asked how he came up with the theory of relativity. He said, that happened while I was playing piano. Inspiration is what creates a movement in a certain area. That movement perhaps is then, when the mind becomes aware of it, is implemented by this thing we call mind. The mind is not the source. It's merely the implementer. Without inspiration, there's no implementation. When there's no inspiration and you try to make things happen, that's called desperation. Anyone else? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. You're the boss.
I will get right up there soon next. We'll get to that side.
It's funny, when I knew I was going to talk, all of a sudden my heart's pounding and I'm nervous talking in front of everybody. And so as you've been talking, I've been going through that, because I don't like to public speak, so I've been going through that of who's breathing, and going into that inspiration of the awareness of that. And it just sort of, just not totally, but it pretty much dissolved. So now I'll get to my thought. Years ago, I was sitting and I was looking at a little flower, tiny little flower on the ground. Just now I judged it, but I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, what a pretty little purple flower. And then a voice came and said, why judge it? Why name it? Why name it pretty? Why name it anything? Just be with the flower. So I did. It was that non-dual. To me, it's like you were speaking of the duality, and so I let go of the duality. I just was with it, and awareness came through.
Beautiful.
Total present moment, just, and I was there, and everything was shimmering. I was in the moment. Everything was different. The light was different, and then I had a thought. Yes, but it is a pretty look, and I could feel it slipping away.
Right.
And so I went back into I was able quick enough to soften and go back into the non-duality and felt it. And it stayed with me for a while. It's not with me now. I'm not in total awareness now. But I got to experience then and some other times. But I grateful for what you said, the non-duality. Because for me it was the non-judgment. Like not judging everything, good or bad. But that's
so listen,
duality.
First of all, the mind only does one thing. It judges. There is no such thing as an empty mind or peace of mind. No such thing. No such thing. You said, I judged it. Notice each time you want to identify yourself as the one doing it. This activity has been conditioned into us for millions of years. Okay? It's not you. You're the noticer that the mind is very critical with things. That's fine. If you can just notice it, it will start to quiet by itself. Don't do anything. Just notice it. The noticing is what causes it to shift. Yeah.
Well, thank you. This is great.
Thank you.
I do have a question about, you had mentioned that we see in 3D, right and left eye. And yet today, so many people are looking at their life in 2D on screens.
Right.
I bet even while you've been talking, people
Right.
have been looking at their phones. And I noticed, because I'm doing research in this area, that there's something about 3D that's very important.
Absolutely critical.
And I guess an example that I'd like everyone to think about, you could look at a picture of the stars, but then you could walk outside
Right.
and see the stars,
Right.
and what happens to your mind,
Right.
one versus the other, though you're looking at probably the same brightness.
Our neurology is designed for three-dimensional vision as a starting point. Not as an end point, as a starting point. So anytime you have something that blocks your vision, whether it's a small room, you know how sometimes you sort of get uncomfortable in an elevator when you... That's because the three-dimensionality has been reduced to 2 dimensions. Our children experience that in school every time they have to read. But most reading is on a computer today. The moment that you block the eyes from having 3-dimensionality, you create physiological stress. The stress reaction everyone speaks about, that Hans Selye spoke about, that is what occurs the moment we have any visual confinement. A book, a computer, a cubicle, a windowless classroom. That creates a classical stress response. What is the effect of that? Myopia, nearsightedness. Hardly anyone is born nearsighted. It only develops under 2 conditions: when vision is confined or when there's a lack of light. Those are the 2 primary factors: light deficiency and visual confinement. So very important, if you're working at a computer, have a window behind you, something where the eyes can escape. Yes?
So we have time for just a couple more questions
Sure
here.
we do. I'll be here as long as you like.
Hi, thanks for being here. So, speaking of awareness, would you say that awareness is innate and it's more of a something that we can practice allowing, and I'm paraphrasing some of the word you used here, letting the light to it so that we can allow awareness to hold our experiences? Thinking, being, doing as we go throughout our life.
Awareness is natural. It's there. It's hardwired. You see, we are pure awareness. That is what we in actuality are. I remember when the night my mother died, I was basically dealing with the morphine and all the things that one does at the end of life. And my sister and Eva and I had been up for about 7 days. And, we were just really out of it. And then I sensed after this occurred that my mother sort of cast the spell that all mothers do to protect their children, which is, I'll put them to sleep for a couple of minutes while I escape. And my sister and I both fell asleep, literally, probably at the same instance. And when I opened my eyes, I noticed that I had fallen asleep because the clock, which was on the wall, was just 5 minutes difference. I looked over at the bed, and I was shocked because the person laying in the bed was not my mother. I said, Eva, does that look like Mom to you? Not at all. And all of a sudden I realized that the person that was my mother was not that physical machine. It was the awareness that you speak of. It was what was animating the body, not the body itself. So awareness is hardwired. It's what causes an infant to respond to a loving gaze with a big smile and so on. Or when they have a little gas, to make a sound to let you know that they're uncomfortable. There is never an intermediary between experience and response. It all is one flow. The infant isn't doing anything, thinking about anything. What's there is pure awareness. And that pure awareness is 100% accurate. It has to be. Our life depends on it. You know, when a deer all of a sudden senses danger, it doesn't say, how did I create this reality? Maybe I need to change my belief structure. No. It's gone. There's no thinking about it. It's gone. If whatever is there is in no way going to harm it, the deer is in peace. But the instant it gets a sense, it's gone. That sense is the common sense that I mentioned to you. It's common to all living things. And that common sense is unbelievably accurate. And you can call it your intuition or your gut feeling or whatever. It's not actually a feeling. What it is that every cell in the body is continually receiving signals of light. And keep in mind, light is formless. It's not a thing, okay? It's receiving signals from the energetic foundation of life well before anything occurs. You know, if you look at animals in the wild, as summer is moving toward fall, the creature's hair is getting thicker, their physiology is adjusting so that the bear goes to sleep. First snowfall comes down, the bear doesn't wake up the next morning and say, geez, I forgot to get my overcoat at Costco. No, it's already perfectly aligned with that. That is what the circadian 24-hour cycle does. Every instance, every microsecond of every day, our body is homeodynamically harmonizing, dancing with Mother Nature to be one with life. All of this is happening for us free of charge. And to get it back, you don't have to do anything. You just have to start noticing the things that habitually we seem to do because we were all trained to do them. We were all trained to do them. I think they're telling me the evening should be finished by now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jacob Lieberman. It was wonderful. One more round of applause for you.
Thank you.